Hello, everybody. Today, we're back in the engine. And now I'd like to welcome everyone who's new or anybody who is rejoining. Thanks for your support, your time, and checking out this content. So I was trying to think of a next system that we are going to build out, right? And on the plate, we currently have our like player stats or like any type of stats in general. We have procedural world generation and we have custom races and stuff like that. So I think for this video, now considering it probably gonna be a third in the series of my attempt at, I guess we're gonna go with it. I mean, two's a coincidence, three is a series, I guess. So I think we're gonna do player stats today, yeah. And yeah, we're back in the database, and so let me come up with a couple of folders here, and I'll take you through it, and then we'll build out the stat system. All right, time for some stats. So I was thinking about how to do this system, right? And I'll go over it in a minute. We've got two new folders here, stat and stat type. So the style that I kind of wanted to go with was a RuneScape style of system where each stat basically has its own experience system. So like they have their max stats, they have the current stats, and then they have like their own experience. So you can gain experience while doing certain whatever, activities. So I kind of went with that type of system. So let me show you what I've got here. So like I said, we have two new folders. One is the stat and the stat type. Both of them follow the same pattern here that we've been working with. Now, going over it, I've opened up both of the stat data and the stat type data here. So we can go through these. So this is the stat data that we were just looking at, or in the folder. So we've got a display name, a description, stat class, a default value, an icon ID, and then some tags. Over in the interface for the database, it's the same thing here that we usually get. Our primary data asset over here. I can shut this off. We've got our data asset. Now this is going to look a little strange at first, but I promise it will make sense. So each one of these holds an ID for a stat that we want to modify. Okay? And in these, so if we take a look at this stat level, so this is like our current level, right? And then we have level experience, we have this health, which is actually technically the current max health we would be looking at. And then we have like magic, we have magic experience, maximum stamina experience, and stuff like that. And we can go along, we can add more stats here, right? For, let's say, our armor or any sort of resistances, for example. We can add it here for the type of stats that we want to use. And because this system is a pretty customizable system, I think actually, um, it allows you to be pretty flexible on how you modify the stats themselves. So if you see here in the stat level, we have a stat base for a stat class, right? And we have a couple of these default values. Now in the experience, we also have another one of these, but we have a different stat class here. And this is one stat experience. We also have a different one for the max stat. And this will make sense in a little bit, but for now, let it be noted that we have a regular base class here that's going to just do a straight modification. It's just going to like add to the stat. Okay, it's just going to do a flat add. The experience one here is just going to do like a simple experience system. So it'll check a value. Is it below certain value, whatever? Yes. Or if it's below a certain value, don't level up. If it's above it, level up. Things like that. The stat max is kind of similar to the stat base, but the stat max instead will do some sort of calculation to calculate some sort of max, right? So if we want to calculate our max health, well, we'll take our current level and multiply that by something or something like that, right? We can get a max health via some sort of calculation, essentially. And this doesn't have to be, this can be just a general max. In fact, it just takes in a value, calculates based on some sort of algorithm, and then returns a maximum. Okay, so there's a stat experience. So we have the list of stats here that we would want to modify, and they're associated with their various classes of what they're going to be, right? So now, over in the stat type data, this is where it might get a little confusing for some people. It was a little confusing while I was working through it, but this system was kind of cool, to be honest. Kind of cool. It works. It works really nice, in fact. So here in the stat data, we have our first one is stat IDs, right? So this is going to be a list of any of these stats that we want to modify, okay? Or initialize by default. And we'll see that in the data asset here. So we've got the list of stat IDs, we got a list of icon IDs, and we've got some tags to go along with it. The PDA, the interface here is the same. This is the same here. Now in the data asset here, what we want to do is set up types that we want to modify. So what do I mean by that, basically? So let's say we have, let's take this first one. Let's say we want to level up, right? Now we have a set of stats back here in the stats that we have associated with specific classes, right? We already see that we have level experience and then like a maximum, right? And like, well, wait, how does these all tie into each other? Boom. That is exactly what I'm trying to get at. So when we set these up, these are set up to be in order of the way that we want to modify them. Okay? So in our stat IDs, for example, for a level up, and we'll take a look at the magic level up because that's kind of what I was like working with just for it's the same format here. It was kind of what I was testing out. So basically what this does is it takes a list of these stat IDs and then goes through the component itself, and I'll get to the component in a minute, will go through and iterate through this list, calculate this value from the class that we have over here set up, and then pass it to the next class. And then this class will do something and then return a value, and then it will go into the next one. And then this next one will calculate some value and return a value or set the value or whatever it needs to do. Okay? No icons here, for example, no example icons here, things like that. So that's the basic gist of it. We have an ordered list that we can modify in order if we wanted to. Now, for example, if we wanted to modify a single stat, we can go down and just set up a single stat, and the component has functionality for modifying single stats here. We'll see in a minute. But we can also use it. The component also sets these up by default. So if we go into like something like this stat player, for example, we're actually going to see 12 of these. These are going to be actually all the ones that the stats that the player is going to be initialized with at the beginning with their defaults. So whatever the defaults are over in the stats, it will configure the component to use these defaults. Now, if you wanted to have various stats for turrets, for example, buildings, you can easily set that up here for, let's say, max health if you really wanted to. So then we can check against max health. And so yeah, so that's the gist. So let me open up the component and I'll show you how this stuff works through in the component and how we can use it in our character. Okay. So those special stat classes, before we get to the component here, we'll just go over these special stat classes that I mentioned before. So these special stat classes, the objects, are going to be functional objects. So they're going to be the ones that are going to apply the change how you want it to, like I mentioned before. So like the stat base, it will just do a flat flat modification. This experience will will do experience and give you the levels based on like the experience calculation. And then this max will just do a general max. So if we open up there, there's a shared interface for all of these here. And these we have the as, we have it initialize, which will take in our stat manager component reference, and then our default value. We'll have a get stat value. We'll have a calculate stat value here, and then we'll have a modify value based on stat. So these goes through, we'll initialize the object, we can get the value if we wanted to, the current value of the stat. We'll have the calculate the stat, which is what we're going to be using to like feed through those stats and calculate the next one through. And then there's also this other one, which is going to be modify value based on stat, which is going to take in a value and it's just going to modify the stat. Pretty simple stuff. So that's for the blueprint. That's for the interface for these special stat objects that we had to set up in our database. Now, for example, if we take a look at what the stat base does here, the stat base has a simple stat value, and then it saves the manager reference. So on the initialize here, we'll set up the manager ref and we'll set the default value. In the modify value, this is just going to do a this is just doing a simple calculation. We're not really this is the modify, so this is taking in whatever current value, and then we're just going to multiply it by this stat. That's what the base does. You can change it to however you like. So basically, if we pass in like a range of 500 for ability, and then we want to say the stat value, whatever, we multiply it by that, and then we just return it. That's how we basically work. We'll have a calculate stat here. So this is where we're going to do the calculation. So this is the simple add, like I said. So this is where we're just going to take our base and we're just going to add it to the stat and then just simply return it. We've got the initialize, and then we have the as. Now in the experience, it's slightly different. There is a next level experience and then experience scaling. There's also two private functions here that I could set up. One is the experience for the next level, so it'll take this experience, it'll simply do a multiply against the scaling, add 100 to it, and then just simply pass it back. Yeah, send it and then just pass. And then we also have this apply. Now this apply is kind of exactly what it says. It takes your stat value, adds your stat value, and then simply loops through and gets you the amount of levels you leveled up. And then it sets the next level experience. So this stat experience will actually return off of this calculate stat. This will apply the experience, and this will return how many levels we leveled up. And then we have the get, which is just parent. We have the as, and then we have a modify stat, which experience. I don't know if you really want to modify the stat based on experience, but if you want to have like, I don't know, your ability to scale off of your global experience for that ability, you can do it right here. Now we have the next one, which is the set max. And the set max one is it's fairly simple here. Initialize just goes to a parent. The as or calculate stat, which will just calculate some sort of stat. So in this max, it just takes in a value, multiplies it by 100, adds 100, sets the value, and then returns it. And then the modify value based on stat. You can do this here if you want to do max, if you want to do things based on max stats, like damage based on max HP, or something along those lines, or some sort of, I don't know, health-based or stat-based system based on your maximums. So back in like the DA where I said that we set up the arrays to go downwards, so the first one will be apply the experience, right? So the experience will get calculated, it'll get passed through into this modified value, and then that'll get returned out on the other side, which then we set up in the DA to go down to the next one, which will be the level, which will use the base, and the base will just calculate the stat. We'll just add the stat. Then the max will take in that base health and modify the stat here, calculate the stat here. So we can do various calculations with various objects and how we want to modify it. So if we have a system that we want to do a custom experience gain or whatever for, we can do that here. Now, all this logic too that's tied to the data asset and everything like that, along with this, is in the component. So let's actually go take a look at the component now, because that's basically our system. We have the data assets, we have these special objects, and now we have a component to go along with it. Now, going over here to the components down here, we have this now stat manager component, and we have a stat manager component interface. I also created another one for a stat user because I'm not sure how I want the blueprints to interact with each other right now. So I'm thinking about just having this one that's tied to whatever actor in order to get this health stat component, so we can use it in our other components. So we don't really have the exact ways of communication yet, but since this is a standalone system, we can kind of figure that out as we go along. So let's start off with in our stat manager interface now. So in our stat manager interface, our stat manager component, we've got our as. We have initialize stats by type ID. So this will take an array of stat type IDs and initialize your stats based on the defaults. So we can pass in any number of stats that we want to initialize to the defaults in this component. Then we have an update values from type ID. And what this will do is this will take in a type ID, whatever the current value is, and then send out a modified value. So this will basically run all those modify values. This will run the modify values that we saw in those special objects to give us back a result. Okay, so we can modify any sort of value based on whatever type IDs we pass into it, whatever type ID we pass into it. And you'll notice something. We're using type IDs here. So we have the ability now to chain abilities together, or stats together. So if we wanted to, say, modify all experience, if we wanted to modify all experience, for example, or modify the experience for health and stamina, or if we want to modify whatever stats, we can simply create that list over in the stats type data asset to then pass into here to modify a group of values on this component. Our next one is our get stat modified value. And then we have a get value from stat ID. So this one doesn't use the stat. This one doesn't use a This one doesn't use a type. This one actually uses an actual ID, and you'll see in a minute why. So moving over to this component now, we've got the interface here, and we've got a couple of variables. So our variables here is a map stats, and this map holds string and then the interface for our stat as the value. Okay. We have our two databases set up here as well, and that's basically it for now. Now let's start off with going through what we do here. For the get value, this one takes in the regular stat ID. We just query the map and whatnot, and we simply return this stat value associated with it. So we can simply grab a stat value out of this whenever we need to. Now you're saying, well, maybe what if I wanted to modify an individual stat? Yeah, you can do that as well. Yeah, but we do that through the types. We are only doing the get through the IDs here, the actual specific IDs, not the types. So now we do move on to this get modified here, this stat modified. So this one will go through, it'll grab your type ID from the database. It will loop through the type database or the IDs it gets out of the database, find those in your stats, and then run this modify value. So basically we can chain together various things. Let's say you want to have your ability scale off of magic, and maybe you have another stat of fire or something, or physical damage or something along those lines. You can pass in that stat type ID with that array of those two stats and then run this, and it'll run this modify stat based on the stat. So you can modify your values based on a group of stats instead of individually. And then we return the return amount. Oh, that was so we have the get, we've got the value, we've got the stat, and then we have the update values here. Update values from type ID. And this one looks a little complicated, I know. But this is the one that does the chaining for us. This is the fancy chain. So what this will do is this will update our values in a row. So this is how we can go from the experience to the level to the max health. And this is how we do it. So what we first would do here is when we update the values, we cache our current value. Okay. And then we go through, we grab our database, our IDs from our database, out of our type database to get our actual stat IDs. And then we find each one of those. We take in the current value, and then we calculate the stat. And then out of that calculate stat, this calculate stat is on our like special objects here, this calculate stat. So this is the one that does like just the simple add. It does either the experience or the set the max health or something like that. And then this is why the return value was why I specified the return value as the base stat would be like the return stat, and then the experience would be the levels. So you can pass the levels through. And so this will cache the output. This will go grab the next stat, pass in our cached output from our last result from our calculated stat, and then modify the stat based on that. And then at the end, we can just return the value here at the end. Now, I'm not sure if we really need this return value, because we just need to we just do a chain. We're just doing the chaining here. I don't know if we really need the return value. But it's there, so it's like the last value you get out of all the calculations. So this might change in the future. And then we have our initialize here, which will take in a list of stat type IDs, clear our current stats, go through the database, grab all of the IDs, go through the IDs, again, go through each one of these IDs, go to our other database, and then we've got another little helper function here. This is another blueprint function library function, and this is just going to trim down this data into this class and this default value, like we saw in the data asset. And then out of this class, we're going to do a construct object. out of that. So class construct object. We'll send it to our stat interface, and then we're going to call our initialize stat object, which will take in the stat manager reference, which is currently this component, and then the default value. So it'll initialize our stat with this default value. And then it will simply add that stat to the database into our local stats here. And that's pretty much it. Yep. And then we have our as. So just to kind of see this in action, let me go ahead and open up the character here, and I'll show you how this is currently set up to work. If we go into the character, we've got our stat component now. Now here on the initialize, we'll set up our components, right? We set up our components. Now we set up our stat manager here, and then we'll call the initialize stats. What we'll do is we'll pass in this stat type player. So this is where we can get all those stats that we want to initialize for our player. Now off of that, in the event graph here, I have a couple of key presses set up. We have our last one for our flame punch. So I've got a key press 2, and what this is going to do is take our stat manager component. It will take our stat type of magic level up. So this is the one that we're chaining together. And it will add 1000 XP. Number 3 here is going to simply just print out our stat of magic. So this is this is our current max level. So this is our current magic level. Not our max level, but our magic level. And then our 4th key press is going to see our stat magic max. So this is the max calculation one, right? So if we see this in action, and I'll press, I get to press some buttons now. We see this in action. If I press 4, we can see 100. Now 4 was our max magic, so that was our default value of 100, right? Now if I press 3, we can see our magic level of 0. You can see that, 0. And we have, of course, our default value of 100 here. Now if I press 2, we're going to add 1000 experience. I just added 1000 experience. Now if I press 3, our now magic level is 3. Now if I take a look at our max, it's 400. Why? Because remember, our max value is 100 times the level plus 100. So level 3 is 400. 3 times 100 plus 100. Got it? Now, you can see here, if I keep adding, if I keep pressing, what I'll do is I'll just jam the button here. So we'll add a whole bunch of values. If I check it, we're at level 6 with 700. Now I believe I set this actually to scaling like pretty high. We're adding 1000 experience, but I set the XP scaling in our, where is it here, in the actual stat itself, the stat experience here. We have an XP scaling when we calculate the next level, and this is set to a default of like 2.5. It's like really crazy. It gets pretty high, and we're only adding 1000, so it is what it is. But that's stats. I hope that was easy enough to follow along. And it's a very good system, it seems like. I think I will stay with this, and I will work on it some more. All right. I'm out.